Hello, welcome to Flavor Cafe. So, the name of the channel might be a little deceiving. The purpose of this channel is to have a cup of tea with you guys, maybe a cup of coffee, whatever you're drinking, bottle of water, some juice, whatever, and just discuss some of the problems that are plaguing our community today. We know that today we have a lot of movements going on, right? We have Black Lives Matter, which seems to be the spokesman for our current situation in America. I want to talk a little bit about the Black Lives Matter organization. And then I also want to talk a little bit about the millionaires and billionaires from amongst us that are helping or they're trying to help with our current cause and our current movement, right? And I just want to set the expectations a little bit as well. I shouldn't really say that this is a cause or this is a movement. This is about our existence as a people. Black people have been oppressed since the time that Western European powers have came into Africa, right? Um, Ever since Rome came into North Africa and spread their oppression thereon, right? And I see a lot of people talking about, well, blacks weren't the only slaves, blacks weren't the only people in prison, that blacks weren't the only people that were put in these conditions. But I want to correct that because at a high level, that particular statement might be true. I see a lot of people, they post on my Facebook profile as an example that, well, whites used to be slaves as well. Or, in the beginning of the U.S., the Irish were oppressed and they were put into slavery and different things like that. And by the way, the Africans had slavery as well. Now, I want to be very clear here. I'm not about to justify slavery and forced labor by any means. But what the Europeans are doing with this is they're actually justifying their actions by something that is totally unrelatable, right? So, in the time of Africa, yes, Africans had slaves. Um, those people were allowed to actually marry into the master's family, right? They went home. They had a life. The question is what is Western slavery, right? We have to define that when you're making a true comparison, right? In Western slavery, people were forced to work, but let me back up a second. First, they were stolen, right? They were stolen from their lands. Men, women, children, didn't matter. Yeah, and some people are going to say, well, there was a group of this group, they sold slaves to the Europeans. Again, there's a difference between an action and a group of a whole people, right? So today we have sellouts amongst black people. That doesn't mean everyone's a sellout, right? That doesn't mean our movements are sold out. That doesn't mean us as a people are sold out. Yes, we do have individuals who sell out, but not everyone is a sellout, right? So let's make that distinction. But now let's go back here, right? Um, at those times as well, as a lot of times slavery would come about with regards to war. Two groups would fight with each other. Uh, the losing side, right, would end up becoming slaves of the winning side, right, unless they came up with a treaty. Now, were there rules around this slavery? I would not necessarily say that there was written, organized rules, but they didn't abuse each other. In the West, they were raping the women. And we always talk about that, and we specifically point out they raped the women. They raped the men too. And I don't mean the women raping the men. I mean the men, the slave masters would rape the men. And was that something that was going on in Africa between, the tribes that had slaves amongst their own people? No. You might be able to find a incident where one person might have done that, or maybe even two, but you don't see that on a systematic basis, right? Rape. Um, Pregnant women would be forced to work in the fields or to continue working when they shouldn't really be working at all, right? Beaten, right? Whips. We see all the pictures all over the internet of people that would be sitting somewhere, their backs are out, and it looks like a map, right? It looks like a three-dimensional map of the Rocky Mountains with a bunch of roads going through it. This is what we're talking about when we talk about Western slavery, or when we're talking about slavery in the United States, and we're talking about slavery within Europe. This is what they were doing to us, right? There's a difference between slavery and indentured servitude, right? So a lot of the Europeans that came over in the beginning in the United States, some whites came over as indentured servitude. They would work for 6, 9 months, a year, 5 years, whatever it is. And after that, they went on their way. They were paid, right? What slaves got paid, right? Yes, a lot of them went out and got their hustle on, figured out ways to get a little bit of money here and there with the hopes of one day buying their freedom and buying their family's freedom. And we know in many cases that never happened, right? Not because they weren't able to accumulate the wealth, but because their wealth would be stolen and so on and so forth. Now, today we still have slavery. We got slavery going on in Alabama, Mississippi. They call them chain gangs, right? You want to talk about, oh, well, they're criminals, blah, blah, blah. But you go to our Constitution, right? When they so-called set slaves free, all except those who are criminals, right, or get into the prison system, then it's allowed to be slavery then. So they acknowledge then that this is a form of slavery, right? Not like some of the penitentiaries where you're just serving your time, right? We're talking about penitentiary where they have hard labor, right? Slavery. So where am I getting with this, right? So I said the topic that I wanted to talk about, or one of the two topics I really wanted to talk about, was the Black Lives Matter movement. I mentioned that I don't believe that a lot of our leaders are necessarily sold out, but the ones that haven't been sold out, um, they tend to not really get an ear. They really don't listen. People don't want to hear it. But this is what's going on in our environment. Black Lives Matter as a statement is important, right? Our lives matter, right? This statement doesn't mean that white lives don't matter. It doesn't mean that police lives don't matter. It just means treat us fairly. Nobody's asking for special treatment. Nobody's asking for extra treatment. We're actually, honestly, we're not even truly asking for even close to fair treatment, right? We're just asking for treat us like human beings. So many people have a problem with that. You want to talk about, oh, but look, they're rioting. Oh my gosh, they're rioting instead of peaceful protests. Let me ask you, what has a peaceful protest ever gotten you? Yeah, think about that. What has it ever gotten you, a peaceful protest, right? You sit back and you even whitewash our history, and you give us all these examples of, this person did this peacefully and, they got what they wanted. Oh, and they specifically whitewash Martin Luther King. Why don't you talk about how many times he marched peacefully and he was beaten? How many times he marched peacefully and he was thrown in jail, right? And there's a whole long history there that I'm not going to get into in this video. But the reality is we need strong leadership. Strong leadership that's wise, right? We don't need to be reckless. We don't need to be out there just doing crazy things. But you know what? Don't tell me about my violent protests and then there's looters out there that are just in it for the wealth. You subjugated people for so long. They don't have any wealth. You subjugated people for so long, right? We didn't build our communities. Where we live is because that's where we can afford, and we can barely afford that. Where every time in history, when we built our communities, when we've actually done for ourselves, you've burned it down. You've murdered people. You make up these little excuses. Oh, he whistled at a white woman. He did this. He did that. It's time for this to stop. I call on our people to start coming together for strong leadership with wisdom. Right? We need to start holding these people accountable. Now, since this is my first video on this channel, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up there. Next week, I'm going to actually talk about the millionaires and billionaires from amongst us. And are they really helping our community? I'm going to actually make a call to action. for meaningful help within our community, meaningful giving back, not this stuff that we got going on today for the most part. And I think it's well intended, but we have to think these things through. And this is what I'm talking about with meaningful leadership. Leaders that are helping guide us to self-respect, to pride for being who you are, not necessarily like the white people, right? The only way it seems like they can love themselves is by hating others, right? I mean, prove me wrong. We need to come together, love ourselves, not based on hatred, but also based on authentic history and self-pride of who you really are. So for now, I'm signing out. I hope you enjoyed this video. It's going to be getting better as it goes on. Please leave comments, like, share. Let me know what you want me to cover in future videos. Do you think that I should maybe, give more historical references, those type of things? Let me know. Thanks, and have a great day.